destroy you, barbarian! No!
In the wide variety of shows that emerged in the 80s and 90s, some have been lost to time due to their unique themes and choices. Others have remained in the minds of fans through pop culture references and even pure love for the world they created. Thundarr the Barbarian is one such show that has withstood the test of time, and there are many reasons why fans continue to hold this show in high esteem as a highly regarded addition to their collection of animated shows. Let's take a look at some of the most insane facts surrounding Thundarr the Barbarian, which will prove why the show continues to be relevant today. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Kirbys Signature. Yes, comic book legend Jack Kirby is responsible for some of the most distinct elements of the show, involving the unique looks of the characters, among other things. This master of the comic book world has his fingerprints all over Thundarr the Barbarian, and that's probably why this show wasn't just a rehash, but an interesting world of interesting characters, which most animated shows carried at the time. Even though Alex Toth, known for his history of designing characters for some of the major Hanna-Barbera shows, was responsible for creating the main characters here, the rest of the characters had to be created by Kirby because Toth wasn't available to continue with the show. It was only because of this that we got some rather interesting lineups in the wizards and villains sector in the animated series. The main characters played a significant role in defining the show, but it was these secondary characters that set the tone of the world upon which the series was built. But that's not all, considering a lot of people from the comic book world managed to dip their hands into the making of the show and made it a major success. Ukla's name was right on the nose. Ukla is a rather interesting character. He's a member of the Mach series, which is primarily characterized by its leonine humanoid appearance, including fangs and yellow eyes. But that doesn't mean that it's entirely wild, because the fact that the others mostly ride bareback on their horses, while Ukla rides his larger, unnamed light yellow equine with a saddle, only proves that it comes from some sort of civil society. However, the creation of this character has an interesting story in itself, considering the name itself alters the way we perceive the character. Comic book writers Steve Gerber and Martin Pasco were the individuals behind the creation of this character, making it even more special because both have made significant contributions to both DC and Marvel. After all, Gerber is known for creating Howard the Duck. So how did they come up with Ukla? The two writers were having dinner in Westwood while Gerber was trying to develop the series, and it was then that he mentioned he had no name for the Wookiee character that the network wanted to include in the series. But something emerged as they were strolling past the UCLA campus where Pasco went to college. And in Pasco's own words, "We passed one of the entrances to the UCLA campus, and when I saw the acronym on signage, the phonetic pronunciation leapt to mind. Why not call him Ukla?" And thus, American pop culture added the name Ukla the Mach into its extensive lore. The legend of the writers. Steve Gerber, Martin Pasco, and Jack Kirby weren't the only popular names that had gotten involved in this animated series for a momentary move from their comic book work, because the series involved a lot of comic book legends. The likes of Buzz Dixon and Roy Thomas were involved in the show, and it was under the recommendations of Steve Gerber and Mark Evanier that Kirby would be brought in for the character designs. This had a significant impact on the world built around these characters, as the dialogues ultimately sounded like the 70s comic books had come to life. Thundarr wasn't always sounding exposition heavy and rather opted for fewer words, with the likes of demon dogs, lords of light, and his iconic war cry being "I."
What manner of man are you? Free!
One of the most memorable moments was when he was asked what kind of man he was, and he responded, "Free." So yeah, you knew right away that this guy knows what he's doing and he isn't going to waste much time talking around. An element like that managed to change the way that this character was perceived. They had their own private dark side. Since the world of Thundarr and the other characters in the series were primarily designed by the legendary Jack Kirby himself, fans were often treated to some influences of his work from the comic book world. Kirby managed to capture the tone of this series with the wide variety of characters that would appear and face off against Thundarr and his team. However, there was also the character of Gemini, a more obvious rendition of the popular DC villain Darkseid due to its design and other aspects. Gemini ended up being one of the show's bigger villains, and he was rather complex, having a split personality in addition to being a cyborg. How was this split personality functioning? While one half was quite reasonable, the other half became very aggressive. Apart from looking kinda similar, this character could also shoot lasers from his eyes, but the one thing that just took the influence to a whole new level was when Gemini was pushed into a magic that turned beings into stone in his very last appearance. Fans of DC could recognize that this hints at the arc of Darkseid, as one of his storylines features a similar demise when both he and Lex Luthor are exposed to the anti-life equation. They both end up becoming statues in the Source Wall, next to the others who had solved the anti-life equation. A rather sneaky move from Kirby here. Sunsword or lightsaber? So the network demanded that a Wookiee character be introduced in the series, and Ukla was brought in. The character actually worked. You would think that's enough with the Star Wars material. What else could be brought in? Thundarr's Sunsword was something that made him stand out as the protagonist of the show, and it was given to him by none other than Ariel herself. This sword is entirely under the control of the wielder, since they can control the activation of the energy beam that can also be deactivated, leaving only the hilt. Does that sound like a lightsaber? You decide. Apart from being able to cut through almost anything, the sword can also be used to disrupt major energy attacks, which also include the magical ones, and thus deflect the effects of the magical spells. Although the sword is primarily associated with Thundarr, one of the series' narratives revolves around the recharging of the sword, and how ownership shifts based on who performs the charging work. Dystopian Setting. Unlike the shows that stood as primary influences for Thundarr, like Conan the Barbarian or He-Man, Thundarr is actually set in the future. The timeline is set around a post-apocalyptic Earth in the year 3994 AD. By this time, the wasteland, with crumbled memories of a better past, has been divided into kingdoms and territories, most of which are ruled by wizards. Some moments make it quite clear that we are set in the future, as we get to witness things like the ruins of some of the major United States monuments, including New York City, bits of Mount Rushmore, and even the remains of what could have been the HQ of NASA, which plays an essential part of the plot at some point. A lot of focus was given on showing the US, the UK, and even Mexico in this dystopian setting, but the one thing that stood apart from all of this was the shattered moon. The moon is divided into two halves, since the strong gravitational forces managed to keep them together, and this body remains at the same distance from Earth as it did previously. Unlike most other choices for a dystopian future, Thundarr went for a more savage, super science and sorcery-filled tone for the future of this society. Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, presents Thundarr. Who can forget Harvey Birdman, the lawyer who would represent cases that no other lawyer wanted to take, and thus feature some of the major players in the Hanna-Barbera animated series world. Now, Harvey has even become Attorney General, with his daughter also getting a chance to present herself. Still, back then, the 2007 animated series ended up featuring a who's who of major players from the animated world. Although Thundarr was often forgotten by fans due to the show's sudden cancellation, despite its success, it has made a sufficiently strong impact in this animated universe. So Harvey Birdman saw the right opportunity and gave our friend Thundarr multiple appearances during the show's original run. While none of these appearances were very similar to the way we might remember Thundarr, they did shed some interesting light on the character, and we even got to witness him alongside Fred Flintstone during one of his appearances. Though fans were shocked by this take on the character, getting to watch him once again on the screen in 2007 did make for a nice little treat. How it all began. The origin of the entire narrative remains unclear throughout the series, despite playing a crucial role throughout its run. In fact, the opening features a quick run-through of this arc, where Thundarr was a barbarian and a slave to Sabian until he was freed by Princess Ariel and provided with the Sun Sword, through which he fought against evil wizards and other villains. There was the only time we got to explore this premise, and it was never explored further through an individual episode, a common occurrence with most shows of that time. It's almost like watching a movie that doesn't give in to the origin of the superhero in the film, and instead offers hints towards a possible take on the origin story. With the large number of shows that had a similar premise around that time, fans of the show had enough material to create a rendition of the origin story based on the opening provided. It's actually a smart move. Ariel's knowledge bank. Now, once you see Ariel, it becomes clear that she is rather different from the other two main characters. She is clearly wiser. In fact, she begins her arc as the daughter of Sabian, the show's primary antagonist. Her character ultimately becomes one that provides insight into the events that have transpired by offering exposition about the arc. Now that requires her to be quite wise and knowledgeable, considering there wasn't anyone alive who could have told these people about the past that Earth once had and the major changes that had shaken it into the present scenario. Ariel's knowledge comes from her father's library, and even though she provides her expertise to her two partners during their various adventures, they mostly avoid her information. The fact that she is quite powerful in terms of using magic also comes from the vast knowledge that she has been able to access in the library. Her powers included shooting energy blasts, teleporting people, and she could even fly during certain events. Her magical powers are such that it often feels as if there's no limit to them, and she can use them every time Thundarr fails to defeat a particular enemy. But there's a limitation. Every time her hands are bound, she cannot use her magical powers. Sounds like another bit of DC reference, particularly a Wonder Woman reference being introduced by Jack Kirby. A common mistake. In the 1960s, most of these animated shows shared a similar look, and their iconic styles were largely attributed to the brilliant minds at Hanna-Barbera. Can you imagine that the same production gave us the likes of Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, the Jetsons, and even Yogi Bear? So it became quite clear that anytime a new cartoon came up, people would right away take into consideration that it was the next big show from Hanna-Barbera. Since Thundarr was released at a similar time and had a tone that bore similarities to most shows of the era, it also ended up falling under the Hanna-Barbera banner, which resonated with fans of the show on a subconscious level. However, Thundarr the Barbarian wasn't a Hanna-Barbera show. In fact, it was produced under the Ruby Spears production label, led by the former writers from Hanna-Barbera, Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. This confusion wasn't limited to the fans, as in 2010, the Warner Archive released the entire series under their Hanna-Barbera Classics collection, but that was clearly a mistake. Later, it became clear to some fans that, although the show wasn't released under that banner, it did become part of the Hanna-Barbera family of shows. Along came Laverne and Shirley in the Army. With 21 half-hour episodes released under the Ruby Spears production, the series had become quite a hit among fans. These episodes aired from October 1980 to October 1981, exactly 1 year on the ABC network. However, despite the show's success and positive reception from viewers, it was cancelled because the network wanted to make room for some of their other shows. What were these other shows? They were trying to create space for animated takes of classic shows like Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy. It was only later in 1983 that reruns of the show were added to NBC's Saturday morning lineup. Ukla the Band. What felt like the end of one of the most amazing animated shows ever was, in fact, the beginning of a whole new story. This series became a prime source of references and callbacks, with many shows also incorporating it into their pop culture relevant dialogues. But one of the coolest references is the fact that there's a band in Buffalo, New York that has the iconic name Ukla the Mock. In 2017, Treya Zogthoth, the guitarist for Morbid Angel, mentioned that the animated series inspired their new album titled Kingdoms Disdained. You know you have created something absolutely iconic when your creation has a strong impact on artists of a wholly different generation. The Lost Comic Book History. Seeing the wide variety of people from the comic book industry who had been involved in the making of the series, it makes sense for us to expect a comic book interpretation of the series. However, that is just one of the most troubled arcs of this animated series, as various efforts have been made, but most of them were either cancelled or shut down. The very first attempt at this was made by Jack Kirby, who had wanted to create a Sunday strip, but that project was ultimately cancelled. Then came Whitman Comics, the new name for what was formerly known as Gold Key Comics, and they had plans to create a comic book series for the show. But there was no further development from them, apart from a rumor that a mini comic did exist, but no one got to see this so-called graphic novel. A Thundarr the Barbarian movie. Hollywood took note of the success of animated shows at the time and jumped in to capitalize on the opportunity by acquiring the rights and developing movies based on these shows. Over the years, we've seen various attempts to bring these animated shows to life, and while some have been major successes, others have been complete failures. However, one cannot disagree with the fact that it did become a full trend. Even though most of these movies ultimately ended up being failures, they did have an impact on pop culture and managed to remain in the eyes of fans as something they could revisit. Thundarr the Barbarian had every reason to be adapted into a film, considering the dystopian setting was something that studios were desperately looking to bring to life. At the same time, other elements, such as the guns, character arc, and powers, could have been the perfect blend in the sci-fi sphere. However, in the end, the show never managed to secure a movie deal. Some fans are still waiting for a chance to witness this series make a comeback on the big screen soon. We can only hope that some fan watches this video and becomes passionate enough to bring this story to life. Dynamite Entertainment picks up the chance. Over the years, comic books have become a medium that has successfully revived major franchises and explored prequels of various cinematic ventures and animated shows. We had a major exploration of the John Carpenter sci-fi action movies through the pages of the comic books, which became an absolute hit. Meanwhile, shows like G.I. Joe have been continually expanded through the comic book lore. It was only fitting for fans to expect that their favorite animated series, with its amazing visuals, would also have the opportunity to be featured in a graphic novel. And it seems that these wishes have come true, as in July 2024, it was announced that Dynamite Entertainment has acquired the license to adapt Thundarr into comics. Dynamite has been quite a success, with their takes on some of the major names in the animated world, such as Space Ghost and even Red Sonja, breathing new life into these vintage pieces. And we can expect Thundarr to make his debut soon, considering the founder and CEO of Dynamite Comics, Nick Barucci, stated recently, "Our 20th year may end up being our best to date. A lot of projects we've been working on for years are coming to fruition. Things we started at a licensing show in 2023 will be hitting stores during 2025 and 2026. And that is a wrap, guys. As I said, you just know a show is iconic when its characters become an integral part of pop culture references, and manage to break the mold by still staying relevant in the present, where fans and creators are seeking variety in content. Now, a director like Denis Villeneuve might not raise his hand for a live-action project based on the animated series, but I guess we have to live with the what-ifs. What do you think will revive the series and bring us the charm of this world that Thundarr and Ariel came from? Tell us in the comments. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one.